Hi, I'm RJ and welcome back to my mythos. So today I am actually back with a Greek mythology and makeup video. Mythology and makeup was a series I was hoping to do one video a month, but then life got busy. Thank you for those of you that did subscribe for this kind of content and have stuck around. Hello to any new subscribers who have found me through the algorithm. I am going to today be doing my makeup while telling you a bit of Greek mythology, and today I have decided to focus on the story of Hades and Persephone. You probably already know the myth of Hades and Persephone. It's probably the most popular Greek myth out there. It's the one that seems to be the gateway to learning about other myths, which is fantastic because it's a wonderful story and there are so many good interpretations of it. There's the original interpretations, there's modernized versions, like Lore Olympus is the big famous one. Hades appears obviously in Disney's Hercules. They use the Roman name. I immediately went into the Greek name. Yeah, Disney's Hercules has Hades in it. It doesn't have Persephone in it, which is unfortunate because I would really like to see what Disney did with her. Anyway, less waffle, let's go make a cup of tea, roll the intro, and then let's get into the myth. Okay, so I am by no means a master of either makeup or mythology, so if you want to know what I'm using on my face, have a check in the description box. I hope you like what I do with my face. It's just mainly a way for me to distract myself while talking to the camera. If you know other versions of the story I'm about to tell, then please sound off in the comments. Let's have a bit of a discussion. There are loads of different versions of this myth, as I said in the intro, but I'm telling you the one that I particularly like and the one that I grew up knowing. So here we go. Okay, just gonna pop a bit of moisturiser on my face. Now, if you know your Greek mythology, if you've watched any of my other videos, then you know that Hades was given the role of defender of, well, king, really, of the underworld when the Titanomachy happened. And I'm gonna go get a headband just to put my hair out of the way. Hang on a second. Give me a sec. Okay, I'm back. The devil hairband seemed appropriate. Yeah, so Hades is the king of the underworld, which in Greek mythology is where you went when you died. Now there's a misconception that this means he's a bad person, an evil god, which you definitely see more of the dark side of Hades in particularly the Disney's Hercules. But actually that's a bit of a misnomer. So Hades was just doing a job. He looked after the people who died, the I can't pronounce that word. The people in the underworld, basically. It was his job to basically make sure everyone went where they needed to be after death. Now, that's no devil role, as he's sometimes cast as. It's just admin, really. Is the best way to think about it. He didn't really particularly punish, per se. There was punishment in the underworld. If you ended up in Tartarus, you did end up paying for things that you may have done in life. So for instance, down there was Sisyphus, who's the very famous rolling a boulder up the hill dude. He did a lot of stuff in his life. I probably will do a video on him because he's actually quite a fun guy to talk about. And yeah, like I say, Hades ruled over all of it, made sure it all kept going. The reason he's miscast as sort of a devil comes from a bit of a misunderstanding. So people didn't really worship him because they were scared of him, is the short answer. which, you know, understandable. He didn't mean that he wasn't respected, however. He just existed, essentially. That's that. Persephone, on the other hand, was one of the more virginal goddesses. So she was the daughter of Demeter and Zeus. Yes, Zeus, who was married to Hera, his sister, and who was also actually Demeter's brother. So he puts it around inside the family, just old Zeus. Hashtag Zeus is a dick. So Demeter devoted her life, essentially, to making sure that Persephone was happy. And she wanted for nothing. She was a fertility goddess. So she was responsible for flowers blooming, keeping everything going nicely. Just like her mother, really. She hung out with nymphs a lot. She seems to have not really popped up in much mythology prior to her dalliance, let's say, with Hades. Yeah, she was just a good little girl, hanging out with her mother, hanging out with some nymphs, and living her best life. Now, when I say living her best life, what I mean is living with a very overprotective mother. So it was well known that Demeter was devoted to her daughter. She wanted only the best for her, and unfortunately, being a nubile young goddess, she attracted the attentions of the gods. So there were lots of suitors for Persephone's hand. Zeus himself actually made a play, which is gross on so many different levels when you remember that that's her father in a lot of the myths. Now, there are myths where Persephone isn't Zeus's daughter. So, yeah, if you're going to go with Greek mythology being a tapestry of stories told orally, you can sort of assume that maybe that one's come from one of the communities where Zeus wasn't Persephone's dad. Let's just hope at that. But as well as Zeus, there was Poseidon, there were other minor gods, all pitched up and requested Persephone's hand, but none of them actually ever got to speaking to Persephone, because Demeter, of course, weeded out the suitors very, very quickly by denying every single one of them. So when I say Demeter was a protective mother, she took it to the extremes. She didn't want anyone messing with her little darling. Which, you know, on one level you can appreciate, because, let's face it, the Greek gods weren't exactly known for their fidelity or their particularly worshipful treatment of women. But on the other hand, he's incredibly controlling, and you've got to wonder how trapped Persephone might have felt. And this is a modern interpretation of Persephone, actually, is that she may have been at loggerheads, really, with her mum about the suitors. She may have been more open to the idea of marriage than her mother might have actually wanted to allow for her. Which is where Hades comes in. Now, Hades spent most of his time in the underground, in the underworld. God, if he spent most of his time in the underground, the poor guy. He'd just spent a lot of time getting on and off tubes. I'm aware that joke probably only works if you're from England and you know about the English subway. Anyway, yes, so Hades, on one of his infrequent visits to the above world, to Earth, essentially, spotted Persephone while she was hanging out, chilling, doing a thing, just being gal pals with some of the other nymphs, and he immediately fell for her. Just hook, line and sinker, this was the woman he wanted, and he was going to stop at nothing to get her. So he asked for Zeus's blessing, which, if you follow the mythology of Persephone being Zeus's daughter, I suppose sort of makes sense, in that whole patriarchal bullshit of you ask the father for permission. But also, when you knew about Demeter, you know she's not going to say yes. So actually, I suppose that makes even more sense. You know your mum's going to say no, you always go to your dad, don't you? So if you know Demeter's going to say no, you probably go and hit up Zeus, who, let's face it, is probably going to be more open to his brother getting his end away. So yes, Zeus approved. Zeus went, yeah, wham dude, go get her. So officially in the mythology, there's actually no writing about what Persephone actually thought of this, but you know, women in Greek mythology didn't really get much say in their suitors, which we'll come on to, don't you worry. So Hades, having his permission from Zeus under the belt, made a plan, and that plan was to respectfully approach Persephone, offer himself as a suitor, and, you know, woo her with flowers and diamonds, and no, it wasn't, I'm lying. That plan was to kidnap the shit out of Persephone, which he did by tracking her down when she was hanging out with some of her mates, some of the nymphs, and opening a hole in the earth between the underworld and Earth, and riding out on his chariot pulled by 4 black horses, and swooping down, scooping up Persephone and running off with her back to the underworld. So basically, Persephone didn't get a say in this. Now this is referred to in mythology as the R word of Persephone, the R word being a word in modern lexicon which implies a assault of a intimate nature. This does lead to some confusion. It's so in the time when the main writings were being put together, that word didn't have the same connotations that it has today. It basically just meant kidnap, which isn't great, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying what Hades did was good, but the connotation of the word isn't quite as bad. But yeah, he scooped her up, took her down to the underworld, against her will, it has to be said. Now, I like some modern interpretations on this that have sort of put a bit more, what's the word? More tellings now that seem to have a bit of interaction between Hades and Persephone before the abduction. Which I'm here for. I do think that that's... mythology is great in that we know that we're never going to know the full stories, so therefore we can and should rewrite them for modern audiences. And I do think this is an important one that has been rewritten to give her more agency, that's the word I wanted. Give her a bit more agency and a bit more agreement in what happened to her. But yes, whether that is actually something that happened is up for debate. So, Hades and Persephone are in the underworld. She's been taken from this beautiful bright land of sunshine and flowers and a mother's love into what is essentially darkness, as far as we know. And that's got to be a little bit of a head spin for anyone, hasn't it? So of course Persephone is not exactly enamoured straight away in most tellings. She obviously pines for the life that she has lost, because there's no way she can go back to the surface, because if she does, the first thing that's going to happen is her mum's going to find her and she's going to ban her from ever seeing this guy again. So she resigns herself to her fate. Now, I like the tellings personally that make it a bit more of a love story. So there is a suggestion that Persephone did genuinely fall for Hades. She became the queen of the underworld. Before she came down into the underworld, actually, in some tellings, she's not known as Persephone. She's known as Kore, or Kore, K-O-R-E, who is definitely more of a fertility, summer goddess, spring goddess. Whereas Persephone actually translates to, I think it's Dread Queen, or she gained the title Dread Queen Persephone. So Dread Queen Persephone threw herself into the underworld. She got really, really good at, passing judgment on sinners and those who deserved punishment. That's what she was known for. She was possibly, in some tellings, more feared than Hades. So it wasn't like she was just sat, crying and waiting to be rescued. She made the best of the deal she'd been given, which, good on you, girl. And honestly, from what you hear in mythology, Hades does seem a very committed partner. He just wanted to give the girl everything. He adored her, he worshipped the ground she walked on, which is why he had to have her. So Hades and Persephone, they're building a life together. They may genuinely be in love. It's lovely to think that maybe it did work out and that everything would have been hunky-dory and Persephone would have just adapted to her new role and been happy. However, well, Persephone might have been living it up. Her mother was significantly less happy. So Demeter had been left on Earth in mourning because she has lost her daughter. For all intents and purposes, her daughter has died because she's gone to the underworld. But Demeter doesn't actually know this fact because Zeus never thought to tell her. He knew she was mourning. He knew that Persephone had disappeared. And he never once thought to say, oh yeah, your brother's got her. He really wanted to marry her, and I think that'd be a very good match. Which implies that Zeus has absolutely zero respect, but also possibly he has absolutely zero balls, because, let's be facing it, Demeter is not someone you would want to cross. Demeter's entire purpose was to sustain humanity. She was responsible for the fields, she was responsible for crops. It was her job to make the earth bountiful. And if the earth is bountiful, that means that humans survive. And if humans survive, that means that the gods have people to worship them. So really, Zeus should have been taking a little bit more care of his sister. Because what happens is Demeter gets so depressed at the disappearance of Persephone that she stops doing her role and the world starts to die. As in the crops, the plants, the trees, anything that humans could use for food. Because, let's face it, if the crops are dying, the animals aren't eating, they're not going to get meat, so even if they're not vegetarian, which Greek society probably wouldn't have been in that time, there's going to be no food, there's going to be an eternal famine, and all those lovely humans with their worship are going to start disappearing. And the one thing that gods need is worship. Slight tangent here. Worship gods. Do we believe that gods create worshippers, or do we believe that worship creates the gods? Because if you're not being worshipped, do you exist? Thought process for you. That's it's a very Discworld way of looking at things. What does Demeter do while she is panicking? She goes to obviously try and find her daughter. Now, she makes her way across the world and she ends up interacting with humans. She's disguised as a mortal, as an old lady. One of the places that Demeter ends up in her hunt is the kingdom of Eleusis. Now, this is possibly the most famous story from Demeter's hunt for Persephone. Eleusis was quite a well-to-do kingdom. With a royal family whose queen had just given birth to a baby son. And when Demeter turned up, they were looking for a wet nurse for said son. And Demeter, obviously grieving for her own daughter, agreed to perform this role. So we've got a goddess caring for a mortal boy. Now, Demeter obviously starts to care for this boy. She's his primary caregiver at this stage, and decides that she's going to make him immortal, which, fantastic. Who wouldn't want that for their child? So what she does is every night after the kingdom has gone to bed, she takes the child and she anoints him in fire, essentially trying to burn away his mortality and bring him into the world of the immortals. She does this for a few nights in a row, and the mother's none the wiser, until one night when she pays a visit to the wet nurse and literally finds Demeter with the baby in the fire. Now, of course, she freaks out, as any mother would, and demands to know what's going on, chastises this woman that she doesn't know. She doesn't know who she is. She's just some old woman that turned up and agreed to take on caring duties. She doesn't know that she's about to yell at a goddess. And not only any goddess, but the goddess that could stop the famine that is raging around the world. So, of course, she freaks out, grabs back her child, demands to know what's going on, at which point Demeter reveals herself. Ah, you've just pissed off a goddess. What do you do when you've pissed off a goddess? Well, first of all, you do not end up with an immortal son. She was lucky Demeter let him live. You know, some of the other goddesses might have actually burnt him up in the fire. Can you imagine if someone had yelled at Hera at the wrong moment? Oof! That kid would not have survived. But no, luckily, Demeter is obviously a matriarchal goddess. She lets the boy live, but she demands that the kingdom of Eleusis throws a festival for her, builds a temple, and so we get the start of the Eleusinian Mysteries. Now, the Eleusinian Mysteries are literally named. Nobody knows what went on during these festivals. Eventually they started to incorporate an inclusion with Dionysus, who is obviously the god of revelry. So it makes sense that he gets included. But the very fact that he is included implies that some like really pagan stuff probably went down. They carried on until Christianity started to become the dominant religion. And then, of course, obviously, the Christians decided anything pagan was either going to be taken over, like Christmas, or was to be put a stop to. Which is why we have no idea what actually went on during the Eleusinian Mysteries, because any records of them have been destroyed. And it was pretty secretive anyway. So unfortunately we can but speculate. I like to think it's probably a lot of sex and drugs and rock and roll. Although it'd be quite interesting if it was just like poetry reading and art projects, wouldn't it? Be different. But yes, so either way, Demeter carries on with her hunt. She's no longer distracted from searching for her daughter, and she's back on it. So as she's doing this, obviously the world is dying. The crops are getting fewer and far between. There was a brief respite when she was acting as a carer, but that's all stopped again because she's no longer happy. She may have been able to live looking after that boy, and we may never have had what happened next. Which is interesting, actually, when you consider what does end up happening in this story. I've just completely messed up the shadow on that. Oh, God. Liner's hard, folks. Now, with the world dying at a rapid pace, Zeus eventually gets to a point where he can't ignore it anymore. And he finally asks what's going on. And it is obviously revealed that Demeter is in mourning. Something which he should have already known. But you know, less said about deadbeat dads the better. And so eventually he realises, and he basically tells Demeter, stop it. Get your act together, girl. And Demeter loses it. She tells Zeus that she is not gonna do anything to cultivate the crops and cultivate the world until her daughter is found. Now Zeus, you'd think, would know what happened here, considering he gave permission to Hades. But he apparently has forgotten this. And doesn't say a damn thing. No, the person who eventually tells Demeter where her child is actually Helios. Now Helios, you may remember from the Titanomachy, is one of the Titans, one of the dudes that came before the gods. He took on the role of making sure that the sun rose every morning and set every evening. So he's usually in his chariot, pootling along throughout the day, seeing what's going on in the world, and he casually mentions, oh yeah, I saw Hades open up a portal and take your daughter through it. Well done, Helios. A little too late, but at least you eventually spoke up. And of course, Demeter is upset. Which is, putting it mildly, Demeter is apocalyptic. She demands that Hades be brought to justice, and that Persephone be returned to her. You know, reasonably, some you could probably say. Unfortunately, there are rules with the underworld, and one of them is that once you're there, you don't leave. You don't leave the underworld. Sets a bad precedence if Hades lets people come down and then lets them leave. It only happens a handful of times in Greek mythology. The most famous one is, obviously, Orpheus and Eurydice. But that is yet to happen. That's a future story and a future video. Because I love that story. It's one of my favourite ones. But at this stage, it's not the done thing. Zeus doesn't let people. Hades doesn't let people leave. So they have to come up with a clever plan. And who is the god in charge of clever plans? That would be Hermes, the trickster god. So Hermes has special privilege amongst the gods in that he is what is known as a psychopomp. Now, a psychopomp is a character who escorts special dead people, I suppose, to the underworld. People like royalty or minor deities. So like half mortal, half immortal. Demigods, that's the word I'm looking for. Demigods. Or kings or rulers or heroes get escorted to the underworld by Hermes. So he is the exception to the rule of folk who can come and go between the underworld and Earth. So he offers up his services to Demeter and agrees to be a bit of a go-between with her and Hades and Persephone. So Hermes heads down to the underworld, talks to Hades, tries to come up with a bit of a deal with him. Not going anywhere. Hades is not about to let his wife leave, and Persephone, as we say, may have fallen in love with him by this point. She's actually seeming to enjoy being the queen of the underworld, which, to be fair, like, good on her. Can you imagine the power? Like, I'd happily be the queen of the underworld. But obviously that's not going to help with Demeter's problem. So Hermes comes back, reports what's going on, talks about how Persephone is, you know, she seems fine. She's looking a bit thin, she hasn't eaten anything. And this is where we come up with the most famous part of the story. So Zeus declares that because Persephone hasn't eaten anything in the underworld, Hades has no claim over her. Now, don't ask me how that works. Apparently it just does. Apparently that's that's a thing. No, I think it actually comes back to the ancient Greek rules of hospitality. So Zeus was very big on good hosting. There's a word for it, but I can't remember what it is. So if I find it, I will put it here. I want to say Xanadu, but that's definitely not correct. If you're planning on overthrowing the local king and he invites you to a feast while you are in his house, if you have eaten his food, you are under his protection. And it is not the done thing to then go and, you know, have a royal coup. There are lots and lots of stories about people ignoring this and their hubris, obliterating them. There's also some cool stories about cannibalism, which, again, oh, actually, no, that does fit in. So there is a guy, I can't remember his name. There is a king who, at this point in time, invites all the gods to a feast, and as part of the feast, he wants to prove that he's better than the gods. So he murders, butchers and cooks his own son to feed to the gods. Now, of course, all the gods realise straight away what's happened because they're immortal beings, they know everything. But Demeter is distracted by the fact that Persephone is missing and actually eats part of the child. So anyway, there's a whole hubris thing and the child gets put back together, but he has a chunk missing out of him because Demeter ate him. Yeah, I'll look up who that is, and again I'll put the name sort of here. And I possibly will talk about that in another video because it's a good story. There's quite a few stories of humans trying to trick the gods and just failing miserably and getting punished for it. That might be Tantalus. Anyway, complete tangent there. Let's go back to Hades and Persephone. So, yes, we've realised Persephone hasn't eaten anything, therefore she's not actually technically under Hades' protection. And Zeus declares that because of this, Hermes can actually go and retrieve Persephone, bring her back to the surface, and give her back to her mum. So Hermes has seen Persephone in the underworld, seen that she's quite happy, seen that there is a love match going on here. So Hermes gets a message to Hades at this point that this is the deal that's going on. And Hades, of course, is ahead of the game here now. So what he does is he offers Persephone some pomegranate. Now, for those of you that don't know, pomegranate is a fruit that's sort of similar in size to an orange. And when you section it up, it's got lots of little individual seeds that are wrapped around with fruit. I don't particularly like them because they're quite tangy. They're a little bit sharp, I find. But Persephone hasn't eaten for months at this stage, and she accepts 6 of the pomegranate seeds. So Hermes gets to the underworld, reports this officially, and yeah, there's a problem now. She's eaten, so therefore the rule has been upheld. Zeus and Demeter don't have a leg to stand on, and looks like Persephone's staying in the underworld. Hades is obviously overjoyed at this. He's getting to keep his wife, who is the love of his life. Persephone, however, realises that she does miss her mother. It'd be churlish of her not to realise how much her mother has mourned her. And also, when she hears what's been going on with the eternal winter situation that her disappearance has triggered, she can't help but feel guilt, responsibility, sadness. And also, she is a harvest goddess at heart. There's probably a little bit of her that misses the sun. So Hades sees this and he starts to bend slightly. He starts to soften. So he meets with Zeus. I imagine they all get together in my head. I like the idea that they all meet on Olympus. Hades, Persephone, Hermes, Zeus, Demeter. It's like an episode of, like, Jerry Springer. There's a lot of yelling, maybe some taking your shirts off. But eventually they come to an agreement. And the agreement is that because she ate 6 seeds, Persephone is going to remain in the underworld for 6 months out of the year. And for the other 6 months, she can come back up top and be with her mother. Now, Demeter obviously isn't best pleased, but everyone else seems to agree that this is a good deal. Everyone gets to be happy. Everyone gets their share of Persephone. And that's what happens. Persephone returns to the underworld. The earth stays dead for 6 months because Demeter's still in mourning. And then she returns, reunites with her mother, and the world starts to bloom again. 6 months later, back to the underworld, Demeter goes back into mourning, the earth starts to die off again. And this is why we have the seasons. So spring, summer, Persephone's up on the earth, hanging out in the fields, chilling with her mum, chilling with her nymph friends. Autumn, fall, and winter, she goes back down to spend time with her husband, to pass judgment on mortals who have died, to be the dread Queen Persephone. So really, she makes out like a bandit from this arrangement, let's be fair about this. She gets to play both roles. She gets a loving husband who's going to wait for her, she gets a loving mother who's going to wait for her, and she gets to just live her life, which is great. It's more than she would have got, probably, if Hades hadn't have kidnapped her. right back at the start of the myth. So that is the story of Hades and Persephone. It's one of the most well-known myths, like I said. It's a love story, it's Stockholm Syndrome, it's awful, it's amazing, it's a way for humanity to explain a natural phenomenon that they just would not have had any clue why was happening. And it's nice. It's one of those that's very easy to reinterpret for people. So, like I say, there are a lot of modern reimaginings with some people casting Hades as a villain, some people casting him as a romantic lead, some people giving Persephone a lot of agency, some people completely removing any agency, some people actually villainising Demeter, who, to be fair, she nearly destroys the world trying to find her daughter. If that isn't love, I don't know what is. But obviously Hades does love Persephone too. He is one of the only gods of Greek mythology who there are no stories of him cheating, really. There is a slight side story, so prior to Persephone, or in some tellings actually while he was with Persephone, which I don't like. I like the idea of Hades as a pure lover. But anyway, he had a girlfriend called Minth, who Persephone violently took against and turned into the mint plant. So thank Persephone for peppermint tea. It's brilliant. The annoying thing is there aren't many other stories about Hades and Persephone. There's a few more about Persephone. There's an entanglement between her, Adonis, and Aphrodite. There is, of course, I said his name earlier. Why have I forgotten it again? Orpheus. There is, of course, Orpheus and Eurydice, which has Persephone and Hades as main characters in it. And again, that's probably going to be my next story. But yeah, they're a very underrepresented couple in Greek mythology, and it is such a shame. So I like the idea that people have started taking their story and creating their own myths around it. And I would absolutely love to hear about any versions that you found, any modern books or webcomics or anything. Yes, I already know about Lore Olympus. Yes, I own the first volume. Yes, I cannot wait for the second volume to come out. But yeah, let me know if you know any other cool Hades and Persephone stories in the comments below. And also, while you're down there, let me know what you think of my look today. I'm not... I don't hate it. I don't hate it. Right, on that note, I hope you come back to my mythos soon, and I will see you later. Bye. The cat just fell off the dresser. She's fine. Some of my ornaments, however, may not have survived. It's a good job she's cute.